Ashley Heidemann from JD Advising. Before we dive into our video, let me give you some background on our completely free law school prep course. You can find a link below and sign up to access it right away. And if you find this video helpful, please like and subscribe to our channel. As of this taping, we have literally thousands of students enrolled in this free law school prep course. We're also very grateful that students rated this course an average of 4.76 out of 5. This course is posted as a free resource on the Law School Admission Council, or LSAC's website, and was just mentioned last month by U.S. News & World Report and the National Jurist as being a helpful law school resource. It has also been promoted by the National Black Law Students Association, Phi Alpha Delta, and various law schools and undergraduate institutions across the country.
In this video, we're going to be practicing creating an outline. More specifically, we're going to be using our criminal law notes to create an outline. To do this, we will be moving through the steps that we covered in the previous videos about how to outline. To start, remember some of the basics. You don't want to simply retype your notes and say that you have an outline. That is not the point. Additionally, we really think you should create your own outline. This way, it forces you to think about the material and to work with the material in creating your outline. We know that it can be tempting to use someone else's outline, but the point of making an outline is not just to have a work product. Part of the point is to go through the process. Thus, if you use someone else's, you may have a work product to look at, but you're missing the other point, learning the law through the outlining process. Next, remember some of the basic resources that you need to create your outline. Your most valuable resource is your class notes. The other resource you need is your syllabus for whichever class you'll be putting together your outline for. For example, here is our class syllabus for criminal law. This is a necessary resource for outlining. Further, here is an example of your class notes for criminal law, the most important and necessary resource for outlining. Now that those resources are handy, we can get to work on outlining. I'm going to show an example that we've created, and we're going to walk you through how to make an outline step by step, using those two resources we have, our syllabus and our notes. The first step requires using your syllabus. The point of using your syllabus is that it helps you put together the overall structure of your outline. Looking at your syllabus, you can see that the first main topic covered in class is Introduction to Criminal Law. Under the Introduction to Criminal Law, there is a discussion of the elements of every crime, the actus reus and the mens rea. Then the class moves on to the theories of punishment. Then after that, the class moves on to studying the burdens of proof. Then mistake of fact and mistake of law and strict liability. Then homicide. So this is helpful because by using your syllabus, you have a basic skeleton outline started. From here, we will work on inserting information like rules, examples, and hypos from class, using our class notes. Thus, that's the first step. We use our class syllabus to guide us in creating the overall structure or skeleton outline of our outline. This way, we're not trying to figure out how to structure it or starting from scratch. Step 2 requires using our class notes. But first, we look at our skeleton outline that we put together using our syllabus in step 1 to figure out what the first issue covered in class was. Then using our class notes, we find the rules that go with that issue. Looking at our skeleton outline that we created, we know that the first issue covered in class is Introduction to Criminal Law. Within that topic, the syllabus indicates that we learned about the elements of every crime, specifically the actus reus and the mens rea. Thus, that is our first issue. So knowing that, we can turn to our class notes and pull out the applicable rules for those issues and fill them in. You can see that we have done that here. We have literally filled in the rules from our notes, and you can see that it is a little long-winded and not perfect. But we have the rule now in our outline. It explains every crime needs a guilty act, omissions aren't punished, there is no duty to act, and there are some exceptions, and the exceptions are listed. Then we filled in the rule for the mens rea, every crime requires a guilty mind. Now that we have pulled out the rule that goes with the first issue, the third step is to break down the rule into manageable parts. As I mentioned at the second step, the rules we inserted into our outline are long-winded and in sentence form, since we literally just pulled them out of our notes. But since we will eventually want to use our outline to help us memorize the law, we want to break the rules down into manageable parts so that it is easier to do. Here you can see that we have done that. We cleaned up our rule statement to show that an actus reus is a guilty act and that omissions are not punished. We then listed the exceptions. If you do a quick comparison, you should see that breaking the rules down into chunks, as we have at step 3, is much easier to look at than how the rules were formatted at step 2. This step in outlining is really important because by breaking down your rules into manageable parts, you will be able to both memorize and apply the law more easily. Remember, the point of an outline is to help you learn the law in preparation for your exams. So this step is imperative. Moving on to the fourth step, that is to add in cases and more specifically add in the rules that we've derived from the cases. What we have done is we have highlighted the cases. This was discussed in the outlining workshop. Many people find it helpful to put notes about cases in a different color font or to highlight them so that they stand out. Many people find this helpful, but you should do whatever works best for you. The point of your outline is to make a work product that works for you. Reflecting upon our criminal law lecture and some of the cases that you have had exposure to at this point, we read 2 cases that we can extract rules from. One case is the in re appeal of O'Boyle. This case is relevant to one of the exceptions to the rule regarding a guilty act. Specifically in the O'Boyle case, we learned that statutes can create requirements for people to act, thus making an omission potentially criminal. So we want to insert the case and the rule we derived from the case into our outline. We suggest you create a 1 to 2 sentence summary of the case and its rule into the outline. It's important that you're not inserting a whole case brief into your outline. That is not the point. Instead, you want to synthesize the material down into why it's important in only 1 or 2 sentences. Here, we've summarized it as a statute mandated that a caregiver had a duty to not neglect the person that they're caring for. But in this case, it was unclear whether she was a caregiver. The other case that we read is the Davis v. Commonwealth case. This case is relevant to the exception of contracts creating a duty to act. Just like we did with the previous case, we're going to summarize the case into a sentence or 2 about why it's important or what the rule is, and then insert that into the outline. Again, we're not going to insert a whole case brief into our outline. That is not the point, and the document would be too long. We've summarized Davis v. Commonwealth to say a woman's mom froze and starved to death. The court found an implied contract for the daughter to care for the mother because she was receiving food stamps, shared in her mother's Social Security, and made it her full-time job to care for her mom. Thus, by summarizing it in that way, we've included the important facts and the rule. You can see that we also highlighted it in yellow, just like the previous case, so that it sticks out to us as a case when we are reviewing. The 5th step of outlining is to include hypothetical examples or important points your professor makes in class to illustrate a rule. The reason this step is so important is because not only are hypos and examples helpful to you to understand the law, But remember, your professor writes and grades your exam. Thus, by reviewing these hypos and examples provided by your professor, they show you how you should be thinking about the information, which is helpful when preparing for your exam. Your professor may even draft a fact pattern that is similar to the examples or hypos provided in class. If that is the case, you'll be really happy that you studied those examples. Much like the tip we gave you about highlighting the cases that you insert into your outline, many people find it helpful to highlight the hypotheticals and examples they insert into their outline from class. Specifically, people like to highlight these a different color than their cases so that they know what they're looking at. Looking at our example, you can see we have our rules broken down into manageable parts. We have inserted our cases, and now we have some examples covered in class. For instance, under the rule for actus reus, we inserted the policy reasons behind the rule. Based on our notes, the professor spent some time explaining why the rule is the way it is and provided examples for the policy reasons. Thus, it's probably important to put those in the outline. Additionally, under the exceptions, specifically relationships, our notes explain that a duty to act runs from parent to child, not child to parent, unless there is a caregiver relationship. Given that was an example covered in class, we inserted that into the outline. Further, under the exception of creating the risk of harm, our professor gave an example about your neighbor's house burning down. If you haven't done anything to start the fire, you have no obligation to act or to help. But if you started the fire, then you need to take reasonable steps to help or to mitigate the harm. For example, calling 911 would be reasonable. You can see in our outlining example that we have decided to insert the example right next to the rule, and we put a little star next to it. That way it sticks out as an example. Then the final example is under the exception for voluntarily assisted. The example covered in class was about a car accident. If you see an accident and you stop to help the victims, you have to act reasonably. You can't just stop in the middle of helping and leave the victims in a worse position than you found them. Since this example came from class, we decided to put it right next to the rule and to put a little star next to it so that it stands out. Remember, some people might prefer to highlight these examples or to do something else so they stand out. Do whatever works for you. The sixth and final step in outlining is to identify and draw attention to the minority rules, exceptions to the rules, and parts of the law that are unsettled. This is really important because these types of issues make great issues on a final exam. Thus, we want to make sure they are in our outline so we are studying them in preparation for our final. We suggest that you draw positive attention to this information in your outline. For instance, highlight this information or underline it or put it in italics. Something so that it stands out to you and you know what you're looking at when you review your outline later. Turning to our outline, you can see we included all of the exceptions to the rules that we covered in class. Before we wrap up this video, I want to share an example of a different outline. We know that outlining is a new skill for most law students and that it can be challenging. So we wanted to show you how someone else sitting in your same class could create an outline that looks different from yours. Outlining as a process is important because you learn the law when you outline, and ultimately the goal is to create an outline that works best for you. This is why we tell you not to use someone else's outline, but instead to create your own. The point of showing you an outline that looks different from the one we just put together is to remind you that it's okay if your outline looks different than your study buddies. In this outline, you can see that the person still uses their class syllabus to create a skeleton outline of the issues or topics covered in class. Then in step 2, they still found the first issue and inserted the rules that are relevant to those issues. You can see they first focused on elements of the crime, specifically actus reus. They included the rule, which again is a few sentences. You can see it's long and that they listed the exceptions slightly differently than we did. Then at step 3, they broke down their rule into smaller, more manageable parts. This is lengthier than the example we put together, but nonetheless, it is still more manageable and broken down than the original rules looked. You can see they set out the exceptions just like we did in the previous example. At step 4, they added in their cases. They did a good job to synthesize the material so they weren't just copying and pasting a case brief into their outline, because we know that is not helpful. They also highlighted their cases so that they stand out. Step 5, they also added in examples and hypotheticals from class. This person chose to put this information in red so that it stands out to them as important and as a hypo. They added in more detail than we did in our previous example, but that's okay. They are doing what works best for them. So overall, this outline is longer than the one we put together. However, that is okay. You have to make an outline that works best for you. And while there are basic steps we should follow when putting our outlines together, there is not a rule that requires every outline to look one particular way. What is important is that the outline works for the person that needs to use it. Remember, the goal of outlining is not simply to type up your class notes and call it an outline. You still want to follow the basic steps that we took together here. If you're doing that, then you are outlining correctly. All right, that wraps up this video. We hope you found it helpful and are a little more confident about outlining.